By the end of 1944, the majority of Japanese commanders realized how disastrously the war was progressing. Senior Japanese naval air commanders decided there was no alternative but to use the desperate tactic of loading planes with bombs and crash diving them into the flight decks of enemy carriers. In October 1944 at Leyte Gulf, the first of these crash diving units sank the carrier St. Lo and damaged a number of other ships. These initial successes and the declining effectiveness of conventional tactics against the U.S. Navy's improving defenses led to the decision to dramatically scale up what had come to be known as kamikaze units for the impending Okinawa campaign. Armed with a half-ton of explosives, the crew of an antiquated Val dive bomber set out to crash into a U.S. ship off Okinawa. One of the 1900 obsolete kamikaze aircraft that would be sacrificed by the Japanese High Command during the Okinawa campaign. There was, however, one significant distinction with this aircraft: it was being flown by a talented young pilot with close to 3 years of combat experience. After a year of intensive training, Shigeyoshi Hamazono was posted to the 582nd Naval Air Unit in Rabaul as the Guadalcanal campaign was coming to its conclusion. He was then transferred to defend the Japanese naval stronghold of Truk in the Caroline Islands. When the U.S. Navy launched Operation Hailstone in February 1944 to destroy the enormous harbor and air bases, he was shot down and severely injured. Hamazono believed his flying career was over after suffering severe burns and a torn thigh. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, which took place 4 months later, saw the Imperial Japanese Navy lose nearly all of its experienced pilots. Because of this, when the U.S. Sixth Army invaded the Philippines in October, the IJN was in such desperate need of experienced pilots that Hamazono, despite his disabilities, had his burns patched up and was sent into the heat of battle. Toward the end of the doomed Philippines campaign, what was left of Hamazono's unit was transferred to Japan. In 1274, Kublai Khan sent a vast Mongol fleet from Korea to invade Japan. Due to being heavily outnumbered, defeat seemed certain for the Japanese. A typhoon struck while the invading fleet was at sea, destroying it. The Japanese believed that the gods had sent this wind to save their country. In Japanese, this divine wind is known as kamikaze. It was hoped that the kamikaze, having already vanquished one barbaric force, could do the same for this impending U.S. invasion force. On March 25, 1945, a meeting was called to discuss the need to employ the crash diving strategy in order to defend Okinawa against the impending U.S. landing attempt. Hamazono's unit, which had been brought up to strength with pilots having had a few weeks of training, was chosen as a takotai. The official Japanese name for the kamikaze, which translates as Special Attack Unit. A few days after the announcement, Hamazono was pulled to one side by the unit commander and told that he was transferring him to another unit. His skills could better serve Japan with him still alive. Hamazono declined, claiming he couldn't bear the dishonor of continuing to live while his friends died protecting the nation. He would perform his duty alongside the other pilots in the group. The following week he tried to avoid thinking about the mission by watching movies at the nearby theater, but he was racked with nightmares and unable to sleep. In what would end up being the Pacific War's final major campaign, the American invasion of Okinawa began on April 1, 1945. On April 6, the first round of special attack missions to defend the islands will be launched. On April 5, Hamazono's unit flew to its forward operating base at Kokubu Airfield in southern Kyushu in preparation for the special operation the following day, which by chance was only 50 miles from Hamazono's childhood home. He called his mother that evening to bid her farewell. The seventh of 12 children, he knew how hard it must have been for his mother to cope, and he wanted to thank her for everything she had done for him. All he could hear on the other side was his mother crying the entire time. She never said a word. Hamazono was surprised to receive a visitor early the following morning after yet another restless night. His older brother had ridden a bicycle through the night to come and pay his respects. He gave him his favorite snack, which his mother had made, and told him that everyone was proud of him. Hamazono requested that he look after mother and father on his behalf. His aircraft, an Aichi Type 99 dive bomber known to the Allies as VAL, was, as he had anticipated, practically obsolete. The VAL, which was first produced in 1939, was crucial to the early Japanese campaigns across the Pacific. But because of its slowness, it hadn't seen much action since October 1943. The loss of maneuverability brought on by the additional weight of the bombs compounded the issue of an underpowered engine. A pilot and navigator who also served as the rear gunner firing a 7.7mm machine gun made up the VAL's two-person crew. Having no armor or self-sealing fuel tanks, it was a death trap if they ran into enemy planes en route to their target. 19-year-old Kazuo Nakajima, who had just graduated from flight school and had no prior combat experience, was to be Hamazono's navigator and the person he would share his death with in a few hours. He had the look of a condemned man on his face. At Okinawa, more than 400 miles to the south, the biggest amphibious invasion of the Pacific campaign was in progress. More than 1,200 ships were used as part of the naval support for the Okinawa landing, and it was this naval support that would be the main target of the massive kamikaze operations. After examining the 250-kilogram bomb under the fuselage, and the two additional 60-kilogram bombs on racks under each wing, Hamazono entered the cockpit of the VAL at 2 p.m. with a full tank of precious gas and a stomach full of his mother's dumplings. Despite using the entire length of the runway, the plane could hardly muster the speed necessary to take off. Their flight path took them directly over the lower part of the Satsuma Peninsula, where Hamazono had spent his childhood. He looked down at the familiar fields where he had gone on picnics as a boy. As the plane headed out over the ocean with its half-ton of primed explosives, Nakajima released the safety catches on the 5 bombs. The crew considered the deteriorating weather to be somewhat of a blessing because it made it simpler to avoid detection. Nakajima noticed that the second plane in their formation of 3 had vanished. The usual excuse for failure to complete a mission was engine trouble. Hamazono calculated that they could only manage a speed of roughly half that of any enemy fighters that might be in the area due to the weight of the bombs and the aircraft's age. Soon after 4:15 p.m., Hamazono caught a glimpse of 2 or 3 white objects in the sky, enemy planes, through a gap in the clouds. That indicated that they had been picked up by radar. The lead aircraft was signaled by Hamazono, but the pilot, who had no prior combat experience, did not respond. Nakajima, sitting in the rear, had spotted the enemy planes too. They were above and behind and less than a minute away. Soon about 100 tracer bullets came raining down. As the bullets whistled past, Hamazono pulled hard to the left on the control yoke and banked the plane to reduce the exposed target area. As the tracer bullets got closer, he entered a steep dive and pulled level only when he left cloud cover. Instinctively turning back up into the clouds, Hamazono believed he saw flames behind him and concluded that his wing leader had been shot down. Now the enemy fighters would be coming after him. Nakajima yelled that 3 fighters were headed their way. To increase speed and handling, Hamazono made the decision to dump the main 250-kilogram bomb. There was still 120 kilograms of explosive on each wing, which, while not enough to sink even a small ship, was more than enough to blow a sizable hole through a flight deck and, with enough precision, render a carrier useless. Hamazono was aware from his prior dogfighting experience that planes hovering just above water were the most challenging targets to hit. He lowered the VAL to a dangerously low altitude, just a few meters above the Pacific's blue swells, and for the first time, he could make out what was pursuing them. It was 3 Corsairs, the best naval fighter of the war, and it outperformed the old VAL in terms of speed, firepower, and maneuverability. Hamazono looked around desperately for any kind of ship that he might be able to ram before it was too late, but there was nothing in sight, so he dumped the remaining bombs and prepared to engage in what was likely to be a short struggle. Now it appeared as if their deaths would serve no purpose at all. The lead corsair put the Val in his sights and came in for the attack. Its 6 machine guns were blazing away. Hamazono rolled hard left and slid the plane away in the same direction. Each time the corsair attacked from the right, he would slide the Val away to the left, and move away to the right when it came in from the left. Hamazono noticed that the rear machine gun hadn't fired yet, so he looked over his shoulder to see Nakajima crouching down with his head between his legs. The 19-year-old had completely lost his nerve. He was commanded to begin firing by Hamazono or they would both be obliterated. Recovering his wits, Nakajima grabbed the rear machine gun and began firing relentlessly at their pursuers as Hamazono continually wrenched the Val from side to side. While the aerial dance continued, Hamazono tried to remain on a rough north by northwest course in the general direction of Kyushu, following one violent bank to the left. 5 or 6 bullets burst from above through the cockpit and sliced a line inches over Hamazono's right shoulder and down in front of his left foot. The smell of gasoline wafted through the cockpit. Hamazono looked down to see blood dripping from his right hand. Nakajima too had been hit and was bleeding profusely. The corsair continued to attack relentlessly. The Val skimmed across the waves, its crew clenching in fear, awaiting the final hail of lead that would finish them off. But when Hamazono peered up through the bullet-riddled canopy, he saw that the corsairs were banking away. Inexplicably, they had given up. Hamazono initially felt a brief sense of relief, but then gulped as he looked down at the fuel gauge. With fuel leaking from their tanks, they were flying on fumes. The 2 young men miraculously made it back to Kyushu in the battered Val before the engine sputtered to a halt. The Val crashed into woods near an army base at Chiran and burst into flames. Data from the United States reveals that from the start of hostilities in late March until fighting ended on June 23, there were more than 1,900 suicide plane attacks on Allied forces. The Special Attack Forces sank about 30 ships and damaged hundreds more during the Okinawa campaign, adding to the tally of a dozen or so that had been sunk in such attacks since October 1944. The following day at around noon, Hamazono regained consciousness and realized that Nakajima had also survived. Hamazono and Nakajima remember little after the impact. They found out later that some local residents had extracted them unconscious from the wreckage before it went up in flames and carried them to the army hospital. The 2 men were given some time off to recuperate at a hot spring. As one of the few pilots with significant frontline experience, Hamazono was asked to take on training responsibilities at Hyakurihara Air Base, while Nakajima was sent back into the rotation with a novice pilot. On August 15, at noon, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender to the Allies via recorded radio address broadcast throughout the empire. Hamazono believed they had let the nation down. The corsairs' decision to abandon their attack on that cloudy April afternoon is still a mystery to Hamazono and Nakajima. The Val must have appeared to be an easy target to American pilots in their superior aircraft. Maybe they ran out of ammunition or gas. But it is for that unexplained reason that I am still alive. If you like this video, there are many similar high-quality videos on my channel.